Hello and welcome to TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. Today is Thursday, June 2nd, and we have a great show for you today. As you may know, this coming weekend is the Democratic State Convention. And to help us make sense of the convention, both in the big picture, but also for individual delegates and what they should expect, we have Brookline Democratic Town Committee Chair, Cindy Rowe. It's going to be a great conversation recorded earlier this week, but first, of course, the news. In a response to a request by Ukrainian officials, President Biden has announced his plan to supply advanced rocket systems to Ukraine. Russian officials have since fired back, accusing the U.S. of instigating further conflict. Although authorities originally claimed that it was a member of the faculty who neglected to shut the door on the day of the Texas elementary school massacre, the door actually failed to lock, as it should have. The state agency that is continuing to investigate the shooting found that the educator had shut the door and is now in contact with the Texas Department of Public Safety. On Tuesday, the Supreme Court blocked a Texas law that would regulate social media companies' ability to police their content their users can view on their site. Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker vetoed the Work and Family Mobility Act, legislation that will allow all residents, regardless of immigration status, to obtain a driver's license or state ID. The House of Representatives is expected to override this veto next week. As mentioned earlier, this weekend, delegates from across the state will meet in Worcester to vote on statewide candidates and define the policy platforms at the Democratic State Convention. There are dozens of events happening this month in Boston for residents to celebrate Pride Month, and I'm sure you will hear about them in other sources, and I hope you're able to attend. From May 31st to June 4th, the Town of Brookline Department of Public Works will provide a trash amnesty pickup. Residents will be able to dispose of additional bags of household trash along with their regular trash or toter bin. And that's the news of the week. I hope you had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. We've got the Democratic State Convention coming up this weekend, and the weather has gotten nice. Get outside and enjoy it. Without further ado, we're going to cut over to my interview recorded earlier this week with Democratic Town Committee Chair Cindy Rowe as we talk about this coming weekend's Democratic state election. So stay tuned. And as we mentioned earlier, this week we have got the Brookline Democratic Town Committee Chair Cindy Rowe. Cindy, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks. It's always great to be here with you, Representative Vitolo.
And, of course, sometimes we record the interview a little early as we're doing this week, but our viewers are watching it on Thursday, June 2nd, and the convention, the Democratic State Convention, is tomorrow. So why don't you first tell us about the Democratic Town Committee so we know you know what you're talking about when we're talking about the convention?
Sure. So the Democratic Town Committee, as I hope many of your viewers know, is the local wing of the Democratic Party. And we work on Democratic campaigns, we have issue forums, and we just try to make sure that people have an opportunity to meet their elected officials, to bring their issues to them, to hear what they have to say, and to really have a relationship with the people who are representing them, both in the state and in Washington.
And you've been the chair for a long time, so I know you know your stuff. And in this week's topic, we're talking about the Democratic State Convention, which again is Friday and Saturday this week. So what is the purpose of a convention in this modern era we live in?
Well, I'm sure people have images of conventions in their mind and what they've seen on TV, big rooms, lots of people wearing funny hats sometimes. And I have to say, a lot of that is true. The Democratic State Convention here is a gathering of Democrats from all across the state. Sometimes there are upwards of 5,000 people in that room. and they are there to do the party's business. Sometimes that involves voting on issues. Sometimes that involves endorsing candidates.
Definitely funny hats, lots of buttons and t-shirts, balloons, lots of red, white, and blue balloons. And so you said there's sometimes as many as 5,000 people. They're not all delegates, but certainly the majority of folks at the convention are delegates. How does one become a delegate?
Well, there are a lot of different ways to become a delegate. Every city and town has something called a caucus. And if you are a registered Democrat in that city or town, you can come to the caucus and put yourself out to be a delegate. And that is the way a lot of people get elected to be delegates. But there are also delegates who are elected officials, such as yourself. There are delegates who are former elected officials, people like Governor Michael Dukakis. And there are also people who are appointed as delegates because the Democratic Party wants to make sure that the people at the convention are representative of the full Democratic Party. So after delegates are elected, the state committee takes a look to see the proportions of people elected across the state. And there is a procedure to file to become an affirmative action delegate. So people who are qualified because they are in different affirmative action categories based upon their race, based upon being GLBTQ, based upon being a person with a disability. There's several different categories. We have youth delegates. So these delegates are appointed to kind of round out who's in that convention hall.
And so you've got all those elected delegates and the add-ons and the folks who are there because they happen to wear some other hat. And what do the delegates do? Well, let's get into it. Tell us about the platform and the role of the delegates and the convention with the Democratic platform.
So one very important thing that delegates do is they get to vote on what is the heart of the party, the principles that the party is founded upon. And that platform can vary. It's an ever-changing document. So there are votes on what is included in that platform. There's so many issues in there, everything from healthcare to housing to immigration to climate change. You name it, there is something in that platform. And then there are resolutions. So in each time we meet, delegates can collect 500 signatures of delegates to bring something before the full convention. And this year, there are quite a few resolutions that are going to be voted on. Some of the topics are creating a 21st century Bill of Rights that includes the right to have a living wage and the right to have quality health care, the right to have a cost-free public education and to safe, decent, affordable housing. There's a resolution on debt-free higher education, a resolution on immigration policies, a resolution on trans youth, one on school meals for all, so that kids who get universal school meals now because of COVID will be able to continue to get those universal school breakfast and lunch meals even after the federal government ends those COVID waivers. So we get into a lot of interesting issues on the convention floor.
And so two-part question is, one, who, it just takes 500 signatures to get there. Is there any other way to get there? And then the second question is, when do delegates vote on this? When should the delegates be prepared to be taking these votes?
Well, as far as when we vote on it, they usually come up after we vote on candidates, and it can be a very long day. So people who are delegates really need to settle in, and we have a change this year, though. So a new process that we are using to vote, because we are now in a modern era where we don't have to have people yelling out on the floor, you know, hey, who are you voting for? Let me write it down in this book, and let's turn all the books in and have somebody count them in a back room. And it takes hours and hours to count the votes. Trying to do away with that this time. And I have downloaded on my cell phone right here something called Votes, which is an app And every delegate is supposed to be able to vote through their cell phones this year. So we're hoping, fingers crossed, that this works and gets thousands of votes in simultaneously, and that we'll be able to move through these votes very quickly. It'll be a great use of technology if we can.
So we're going to get into that in a little while. I'm going to talk about this year's convention. So hang on to that thought. We will get back to it. It's really interesting. So we talked about the platform and the role of the convention in determining the Massachusetts Democratic Party's platform. But of course, you also mentioned candidates, right? So tell us what candidates we should expect to hear from, to vote on, and what those votes mean. What when the delegates vote on candidates every 4 years, what does that mean? What's at stake?
So, as you know, we have a primary coming up in September. But before that primary, in June, at the Democratic Convention, the candidates come before the convention and we vote on who carries forth the Democratic endorsement. So in order to appear as a Democrat on the ballot, you need to get at least 15%, 15% of the votes from that Democratic convention in order to run as a Democrat. How many candidates will make that? Who knows? There's lots of candidates there, and they are all vying for these delegate votes. So people have been contacted pretty continuously since they became delegates in the hopes that they will vote for certain candidates and that candidates can continue through the process.
So the delegates are going to vote. And if a candidate gets less than 15%, that candidate will not appear on the ballot in September in the Democratic primary. If that candidate gets more than 50%, that candidate is endorsed. Do I've got that right?
That is correct.
So let's say hypothetically there are 5 people running for lieutenant governor. Hypothetically, it's certainly plausible that none of them get 50%. So then what happens?
Well, then we get into a very complicated situation, and we can have several ballots for the same office. So if some candidates will get dropped in a second ballot, and the candidates who go forth onto that second ballot are the ones who have gotten the most votes in that round. This is a bit of a change in the rules. This rule changes from convention to convention. So this time around, if candidates get the 2 leading candidates who have gotten more than 15% will be able to go to a second round. We'll see what happens. We are all waiting to see.
So in this distinctly not instant runoff voting situation, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. In the first round, it's sort of a see who doesn't get 15% and then they're out. If no one gets 50%, did I hear you correctly that in the second round, the top 2 finishers have a runoff to see who's endorsed? Is that right?
That's correct for this year.
But you know, we're always trying to innovate and try new ideas, and we'll see how that goes. And I want to sort of just quickly remind folks, you know, for the governor's race, there are 2 women on the ballot, Sonia Chang Diaz and Maura Healey. And so now I will say out loud, I think it's incredibly likely they both get 15%. And obviously on the first ballot, one of the 2 will get more than 50%, but they'll certainly both clear. But for lieutenant governor, there are in fact 5, if I've got it right, 5 candidates: Brett Barrow, Kim Driscoll, Tammy Govea, Adam Hines, and Eric Lesser. And with 5 candidates, I think it's unlikely that all 5 get 15% or more, or that any of them get 50%. So I think this is where we get into where those details are really going to matter. For Attorney General, there's 3 candidates: Andrea Campbell, Shannon Liss-Rorden, and Quentin Palfrey. I would bet they all get 15%, but we'll see. I'm not going to make you make predictions, Cindy. I know you're very careful to not play your cards, but I could play a few. For Secretary of State, there are two candidates. There's the incumbent, Bill Galvin, and then Tanisha Sullivan. You'll note in those other three races I mentioned, there are no incumbents. Of course, Brookline's Deb Goldberg is the Commonwealth's treasurer, and she is running unopposed in the Democratic primary. And for auditor, we've got Chris Dempsey and Diane DeZoglio, again, a head-to-head. And so those are the races. And can you remember a time when there were primaries for 5 out of the 6 constitutional offices? Right. This is unusual. Is that right?
Oh boy. It's been a long time since we've had, I think, this much competition on the ballot. I think we have something like 17 candidates who are running for statewide office at the moment. Some of your viewers may have been on the Zoom when we had our 2 statewide candidate nights over the last few weeks, because we wanted to make sure that Brookline voters had a chance to actually interact with the candidates and really hear what they had to say, why they were running, what their top 3 priorities were. So I hope we've given Brookline voters a chance to get to know the candidates a little more, not just what they read in the newspapers, but directly speaking to us and to our colleagues in Newton, because since COVID, we've been doing a lot more with our colleagues in Newton because we're all on Zoom. So Brookline and Newton have been planning a lot of things together.
Newton's a long way away from Brookline. So with the technology of Zoom, we're able to spend more time together than we would otherwise. Also a long way from Brookline is the convention this year. Worcester, tell us about this year's convention, both where it is and that sort of stuff, but also let's talk a little more about hybrid and how we think that's going to shake out.
Yeah, so that's another new innovation this year. Every year up to now, to vote at the convention, you had to be at the convention, sitting in your seat on the convention floor. This year, because of COVID, we've had to make accommodations for people to both be in their homes voting and also in the convention hall voting. So there'll be people in both locations, and we've tried to make it accessible and available for people who have healthcare concerns, and hopefully it all works out and we get full participation at the convention. But yet another hurdle to get over in terms of change of how we conduct conventions.
And I think I've got this right. If you are attending the convention in person, you must be fully vaxxed, including as many boosters as the government will allow you to be injected with. And also, when you're indoors at the convention, you must be wearing a mask. Is that right?
Yes, you have to be fully vaxxed according to however many boosters you're entitled to get at the moment. And you have to wear a mask, and you have to sign a document saying that you are fully vaccinated to your capacity. So they are being very, very careful with people who are going to be in the convention floor.
And, in past years, there's been some tips, maybe this year with the Votes app and the way voting is doing, there may be some new tips, but do you have any, helpful hints for first-time delegates or returning delegates about how to make sure that their experience in the DCU Center is as enjoyable as a Democratic convention could possibly be?
Well, these conventions are pretty enjoyable for those of us who like to talk politics, because you get to see people from all around the state who you may not have seen so often. And you get to hear what's on the minds of voters in different districts. Everybody is seated according to their state senatorial district, but frankly, lots of people move around during the convention so that they can talk to their friends who come from other districts in the state. And that's one of the most enjoyable parts of the convention, to tell you the truth. But there will be lots of folks at the convention who will be, there and might be first time people coming to the convention. Bring a sweater. That temperature goes up and down in the convention hall. Bring a sweater. You'll probably have your cell phone. You'll need it this time to vote. And that cell phone has a flashlight in it, which you might also need because when the speakers particularly are speaking, the lights go down and it gets very dark. And we don't want anybody tripping over anything. So do that. Otherwise, come have fun. There's exhibit halls. You can find out about campaigns that are going on, ballot campaigns, special interest groups around the state who are there to talk about their advocacy priorities. So there's a lot of information that gets exchanged at these conventions, and people learn how to become more effective advocates for their causes.
Yeah, and I would add a couple of other things I try to remember to bring, right? In addition to a fully charged phone, you've got one of those extra batteries that you can, little portable batteries, especially for this year. If your phone dies, you're gonna have a hard time using your Votes app, VOATZ, as it's spelled. So be thoughtful about that. I try to bring a couple of pens and a little pad because sure, you can usually find that stuff around, but if you run into somebody, you get an idea, you want to scribble something down. I think that can be really helpful. I try to wear clothing with secret pockets so I could smuggle food in because, hey, that's what I do. You do what you got to do, but they run out of food sometimes, or it's really expensive, or you're like, I don't really need a fourth tray of nachos with that orange cheese stuff. So, a couple of bananas or a granola bar is not crazy. So, stuff like that, because it can be a long day, and you want to be at your best, so you want to be prepared. So those are some things I try to bring. Well, folks have an opportunity to test or practice with their Votes app before the big vote, right? How are delegates going to know they're ready to have their vote cast?
Yes, so the state committee is being very cautious with the app. We all got information about how to download it. Once it's downloaded, there's a way that you can practice voting, which I did just to make sure I knew how to do it. And then we got to vote on the resolutions early before we actually go to the convention. So I did that too. And honestly, it seems pretty easy to use. And I don't say that lightly because I'm not one to easily adapt to these new technologies. But so far, so good. I was able to do all my voting that I was allowed to do so far. So hopefully it'll hold for when we have thousands of people trying to vote at the same time.
And my understanding is the first round of voting will be auditor, attorney general, and secretary of state, and there'll be like a 30-minute window that delegates will have to cast those 3 votes. And then there'll be a second window a little bit later in the day with lieutenant governor and governor. I don't know if that's finalized or if that's still sort of a big idea, but that's what I heard in terms of how it's going to pace out throughout the day.
It seems to me that things are changing as we speak. So we'll see what actually happens. But one thing I do want to mention is that for folks who don't have a cell phone or do have any difficulty voting, there are going to be computer terminals set up in the convention hall. So there will be a backup system for people whose cell phones run out of juice during the convention. And there'll also be people who can help with the voting process at those terminals. So they are trying to think of everything and think of every contingency to make sure that everybody can cast their votes.
2 other benefits to the folks who attend in person that I think will not accrue to those hybrid. The first is the parties on Friday night. So it's common for statewide, not every statewide candidate maybe, but many statewide candidates will find a restaurant with a bar and have a party for a couple of hours. So Worcester's going to be hopping Friday night. You can go from party to party and have some social time. The second thing is sort of like around the perimeter, like in the pavilion, there are tables, right? And different advocacy groups or organizations associated with or adjacent to the Democratic Party are out there, and you can, find the advocacy group that's right for you. And that can be fun too, to help you kind of make new friends and find new things to work on. So those are 2 advantages of going in person. Plus, you get to hang out in Worcester, which is
But
pretty
Tommy,
sweet.
you also get the bag. So
The
at
one
the
with the C-SPAN
convention,
logo on the side. I
when
got
you walk
antenna.
in, they usually give you like a tote bag. And some of us collect those tote bags from year to year, and we use them for our groceries. So delegates, if you are planning to go to the convention, you'll probably get a tote bag, a distinct advantage of being there.
And if you
And
keep
one more thing I'm going to do on the floor, Tommy, I just want people to know, I'm warning you now.
singing the
So
national anthem.
absolutely not. That would drive everybody away from the DCU Center. But you remember the Fair Share Amendment?
I am very familiar with it. Yeah.
All right, it's going to be on the ballot. Income tax, 4%, surcharge on income over $1 million. So to be used for education and transportation. Well, I'm going to bring a stack of pledge cards this high, and my goal is to get them all filled out by the time I leave the convention. So we're going to try to get people to pledge, to vote for the Fair Share Amendment, and to volunteer to work on the Fair Share Amendment. So I don't have any downtime at this convention, Tommy. I'm just going to be working all day.
Well, and I think in prior conventions, certainly nominating conventions, people had to be pretty good about hanging out in their own Senate district for the votes because you voted by voice. But with the app, there's actually, as far as I can tell, nothing that anchors people to their Senate district at all throughout the entire day, right? And so it may just be this sort of molecules in the ocean, just kind of everyone floating around, which means, there'll be some people who will never get your hands on, and other people you'll ask 5 times. And, that's going to be an additional challenge for you, I think.
Oh boy, I am not looking forward to that, but hopefully people will be responsible, and they do all have to check in at a certain time so that we know they're there. There are alternates who get elected in case a delegate cannot fulfill their responsibilities. And if they don't check in at a certain time, then they get replaced by an alternate. So hopefully, at least there'll be a moment in time when we'll know exactly who's in that convention floor, and we'll be able to track them down or email them or text them if they haven't cast their votes.
It's going to be a good time. I will keep my eyes open for those like hidden power outlets. I could find a little juice if I need it in a pinch. I love the convention. We missed the last couple of years, of course, but I had been to everyone prior to that for going back to, I don't know, 2007 or something. And it's a good time. I'm excited for it. We've got delegates, and I'm excited that, frankly, that some people who would not have been able to go to Worcester are still able to participate, right? And that's an exciting change. Of course, we don't know. You and I don't know what the future conventions are going to hold in terms of in-person and hybrid. There'll be a lot of experimenting this year, and I hope people will be patient with the volunteers and the staff at the convention, because they're doing things for the first time in a long time, and also in new ways and get it perfect, right? And so hopefully people will be patient. Cindy, thanks for coming on. Thanks for your work as chair of the Brookline Democratic Town Committee, and for sharing everything that you know and then some about this upcoming Democratic State Convention in Worcester. And I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you as well.